Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Become Indispensable, Strengthen Your EA Practice by Producing Valuable Business Outcomes. We are going to get going in just a little bit, a few minutes after the top of the hour, just to let some more people join. So please sit tight and we will be starting shortly. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to begin in just a few more minutes and just give it a little bit more time for people to join us. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. We're going to begin in about one more minute. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. This is Elspeth McSorley with Mega. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Become Indispensable, Strengthen Your EA Practice by Producing Valuable Business Outcomes. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you all. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please send them through the chat and we'll answer them at the end of today's session. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants. I would now like to pass the presentation to Dan Hebda, Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director for Mega North America.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. The presentation, Become Indispensable, Strengthen Your EA Practice by Producing Valuable Business Outcomes, is sort of a living presentation that I've been giving and evolving over the last, let's say, 2 years or so. So I'm going to start with some context of why this is such an important topic for enterprise architecture. Just on my feed from earlier this week, there was in Forbes magazine this article titled Enterprise Architects, Friend or Foe of Corporate Innovation. And you can see from the quote that there's an author, Andrew Binns, And he wrote a book, Corporate Explorer: How Corporations Beat Startups at the Innovation Game. And in the article, he mentions how that he meets so many individuals as a result of publishing the book. He gets requests to speak and people ask about the topics. He was a bit surprised to see a number of invitations coming from the enterprise architecture community. Now, those of us in the modern enterprise architecture community are not surprised because, of course, innovation is a key element of the work that we do day in and day out. But this perception that enterprise architects are counter to innovation still persists and is part of the theme of the presentation today. You'll note he can say in the quote again that at first I had to scratch my head in puzzlement because much of his experience is at IT departments, which already interestingly he equates to the enterprise architecture requests, are part of the silent killers of innovation. And that there's this difficulty of the adaptive historic practices that are maybe a little bit more rigid with that of enabling that of innovation and experimentation. So, knowing that this connotation of enterprise architecture still exists today is a core theme of why it's so important to highlight value when it comes to enterprise architecture. In particular, if you're looking to have success in your EA practice, to be able to grow and expand your EA practice, this has to be front of mind. So let's start with some topics related to business value. And again, I put it with a little bit of a question mark just to highlight that notion. Can the enterprise architects deliver business value? Now, of course, I believe that's the case. And I think there's a couple of things that are supporting that in what we call modern enterprise architecture. The first is that there's a greater business focus from the enterprise architects. I've got a few quotes here from Gartner Research, and you can see this notion of linking EA efforts to business strategy and targeted business outcomes, as well as moving to an internal management consultancy mindset. Look at the EA practice, not for the work product that you deliver for the architects themselves, but the work product that you deliver that benefits other stakeholders. And if we start to frame the services of the EA practice around those deliverables to other stakeholders, we can really start to deliver and articulate value that can then be measured and built upon. Another key theme when we get to this connotation of enterprise architecture being sort of against innovation or even against value, I run into the question often about what is enterprise architecture? And to some extent, that's a little bit of a trap because enterprise architecture is very broad. And so we each may have different perspectives on the specifics or the scope or the boundary of what we consider enterprise architecture. What's most important, rather, is to consider why enterprise architecture, and maybe more precisely, why enterprise architecture at your specific organization. What is the purpose of the EA practice at your organization? What value does it deliver? What services does it offer? Whom does it serve? And so I have an umbrella statement that I use in these presentations. The purpose or the why of enterprise architecture is to align enterprise execution. You can think of that as the operating model by design or using architectural practices and principles to the company strategy. So, in effect, the enterprise architects look to the company strategy, they look to the current state, and then they're going to architect the way forward. And that can be ensuring that the right technologies are in place to enable the strategy to succeed. That could be looking at the processes that are in place, data, and ensuring that the quality and the accessibility is all valid. It's really a broad notion still. So, I consider it an umbrella statement, a test, if you will, that as you articulate and define the different EA services that you offer, you want to be sure that those EA services, do they fit underneath that umbrella? Can I say that what we do for the organization helps move the company into alignment with the strategy? Some other trends that are ongoing, and you'll note the quote at the bottom of the screen, that the citation, that these concepts, the business oriented concepts that are on the enterprise architecture hype cycle, they've carried from 2022 into 2023. So they've not gone away. Business is trending in enterprise architecture. Business outcomes continues to trend in enterprise architecture, and ensuring that your EA practice, even if it's focused on technology, identifies the impacts it has on the business is key to value and success. Additionally, when we look at value, we want to understand the target. So there's a mission that we have at Mega, is that's to ensure that every EA practice delivers undeniable value, but as recognized by stakeholders outside of EA. If there's one key takeaway from today's presentation, it might be this slide. It really is critical that we don't only assess the maturity within the EA practice itself, but we really look to the stakeholders that we're looking to serve and see, are they recognizing value for the work that we do? Are they appreciative? Are they looking for more? Are they requesting our involvement and our assistance? Or are they sharing that connotation from the author I quoted earlier, in which case we have a lot of work to do? So, if we're going to get value recognized by stakeholders outside of EA, one of the first questions will be, who are those stakeholders? What are their needs? So at Mega, we do have a methodology. We call it noisy to influential. And in effect, it's an external assessment or perspective on the value your EA practice offers to stakeholders within the organization. So if I go back to that connotation, the quote at the beginning, we would say that an EA practice in that context is perceived as noisy. This is a group that contradicts innovation, that's not delivering value, and we need to change that. So if you're new to enterprise architecture, or your practice is new at an organization, or maybe even there's new leadership who doesn't yet appreciate the work that the architects do, there may be a set of stakeholders who perceive enterprise architecture as simply noise. It's a group that does this thing with maybe models and maybe in the back room, and they don't understand the business strategy in the future. We need to change that perception immediately. But it is a step function. We have to go through the process. So the next step is to useful. This is phase one of the evolution towards influential. And it's important to note you cannot skip steps. So if you're in the noisy position, you want to get to useful. Useful we call push mode. This is where you identify a set of stakeholders who are willing participants that have a need. Usually it's a pain, something that they're struggling within their business line or department that architects can help them resolve. And we're going to take architectural work product and we're going to push it. We're going to show them some of the examples of the architectural work that we can do. And we're going to highlight how it can help them resolve those issues. We coordinate with those stakeholders. We collect the necessary data. We identify the problem, architect the solution, and share it back with the proper stakeholders so that they can resolve their issue. When you do this, you've become useful. Typically, those stakeholders will be appreciative of the assistance to resolve a difficult problem, and they start to talk to other stakeholders. They'll share the value that was received. They'll let others know, I had this problem. I reached out to the EA team. They were able to help me resolve it. And that's when you can move from useful to trusted. This is where other stakeholders will start to come to the architects themselves and say, can you help me with my problems? That's pull mode. They're requesting assistance to resolve a difficulty based on some of the information they heard with the stakeholders who participated in the useful stage. Now, here, this transition can be quite viral. When you go from useful, you may take quite a bit of time soliciting individuals to participate in consuming this pushed information to get value. But as the word spreads and the recognition spreads and you become trusted, more and more individuals will ask for the use of these EA services. This is a great place to be, but at this point, we're still to some extent problem solving and firefighting. And so the next evolution is to get the recognition across the trusted stakeholders that if they come to the architects earlier and we work collaboratively, if we work together, then we can get to a place where we identify pitfalls in advance through architectural analysis and avoid them, or at least reduce them significantly so that there's less problems to fight later on. Now, of course, as we go through noise and influential, it's not the same state for the entire company. You'll have to look across your different EA services and the different stakeholders and assess which stakeholders are at which level, noisy through influential, and possibly for which EA service. Because your EA practice, as it grows, will offer multiple services to benefit the business. And so at each one, you can start planning your progression and your EA practice evolution by targeting stakeholders that you know can advance the EA practice that will benefit the company. Of course, that's key to always keep in mind. And then similarly, to identify where they are and where we would like them to be. There may be certain EA services where you don't anticipate making it to the influential level. That's okay. But if we can at least get to useful or trusted, then we know there's recognized value and we can keep the EA practice running and we can keep its expansion. So using this notion of noisy to influential, as well as the articulation of the specific EA services you offer, allows you to plot a vision for your EA practice and its future. Now, how do I get those stakeholders? I'm at the noisy stage, for example. I want to get to useful. How do I get them? Well, this is one of the challenges of the typical architect. We tend to be more introverted. We tend to be technology focused, not all of us, but many of us. And so you've got to get out there and articulate first what is the value you're proposing. So that's going to be a key aspect, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on upcoming slides. The next is I've got to talk to people. I've got to explore. I've got to reach out and find who are the different business leaders. What are some of the challenges they're working on? Maybe there's some major transformation initiatives or projects. I want to go find out how they're going and what role I can play. Sure. Let me see about that. Sorry, I have a note to hide this. And that should be better. Thank you for that. So in here, we want to go through and understand how we get these people. We're going to talk to them. We got to knock on doors. Now, this may sound obvious, but the truth is, and that's what was hidden by the little pop up, that I do have a story, and it's a true story, and it's not an uncommon story. I was giving a version of this presentation just over a year ago. And at the end of the presentation, an architect found me after the session and said, can you help me understand what I can do? I've got a stakeholder, I've identified them. I've even identified a pain point, but they're not finding value in the deliverable I give them. I hand it over to them and they immediately discard it and move on. And so my question, of course, was, well, what rationale did that stakeholder give you for discarding the deliverable? What was missing? And they said, oh, I haven't asked them yet. So, true story that the individual hadn't contemplated checking with the recipient of their work product that if there wasn't sufficient value, what it was that might be getting in the way. So, it really is a key element. Knock on doors, talk about what can be offered, illustrate the value, and build consensus with stakeholders to grow from there. Now, another element is to look at a change that's happening right now. This comes again, a quote from a Gartner research, and it's about the selection of tools. Don't worry, this won't be a tool marketing presentation. I stay on the education and academic side. But it's an interesting shift that it highlights the need for dedication to achieve success in enterprise architecture, and that first use case, that notion of going from noisy to useful, may take some time. It may take as much as, in this example, 3 weeks to 3 months. Hopefully, the scale of the scope of what you chose isn't greater than that because delivering visible value rapidly is key. So, if you can get fast value visible, you're more likely to get commitment from the organization. So, find the willing partners, understand that enterprise architecture is really an enterprise grade level practice that does take discipline and dedication to succeed. Now, as we look at the EA practice, we talked about a moment ago, those EA services. I've changed the headings on this table. So we're no longer talking about noisy to influential. You have to assess the capabilities within your EA practice. So this is a subset of your business capabilities. I'm not talking about the grand business capability model for your organization, but rather the capability model of the EA practice. Because as you look to offer services to the organization to deliver that concrete value, to move from noisy to useful, trusted to influential, you have to assess whether you have the capability to succeed. And so, an example, and this is just a high level example, if we look at a general concept of application portfolio management, I wouldn't consider that, and we'll speak more to it in a moment, the service itself. It's too general. But if I underneath that specified that I want to help the organization rationalize their application portfolio, I can articulate value of that. I can manage technical debt and I can manage and reduce tech obsolescence. I could then ask, well, what will it take to succeed in those EA services? And I've put some general examples just to illustrate the point. If I'm going to rationalize the app portfolio, I need a business lens against which to rationalize the technology. So I'll decide a capability model is appropriate here. Do I have the ability within my EA practice to create and manage a business capability model of my organization? Or perhaps do I have a business architecture team already in place? Or is my enterprise architecture team already doing that? But I need to ask that question because if I don't have a business lens to rationalize the portfolio against, I'm not going to succeed in rationalizing the portfolio. It's really that simple. Similarly, do I have the ability and the visibility and access to the technology inventory required for that service? And then similarly, do I have lifecycle visibility to look at and manage and support that service? So I need to know what abilities within the EA practice I have so that I can plan for the services that I look to offer. So abilities of the EA practice, the value oriented services that I look to offer, and the X's, of course, direct the intersection. Now, why this is important is twofold. First, of course, is to give you the higher chance of succeeding with the service that you've identified. It allows you to ask the question, am I prepared to successfully deliver on that service? But separately, it also supports that expansion and clarity of the EA practice future. So if I've established the ability for business capability modeling, what other EA services could I offer? If I've established the ability for tech inventory, what other EA services could I offer? And then down the line. So as you look to the EA capabilities that you've got within your EA practice, you can start to contemplate how they can be applied to offer other EA services to a broader stakeholder audience to increase value and visibility to the organization. Now, what are some of the new trends to explore? Sustainability. This, of course, is a buzzword that's trending right now. And there is an element, if I'm doing app rationalization, for example, or tech debt management, I can look for zombie apps. What are some of the applications or technologies that are supposed to be turned off that perhaps are still running? Let's figure that out and shut them down. Similarly, I could look to some of the sustainable criteria of the different technologies that I'm choosing. So as I work on new architectures, IT or solution architectures, am I selecting products that have a sustainable vision or sustainable future? Security, I don't need to speak a lot to that one. It's a key element. Architecture can play a huge role in that. Data governance, this one is trending more and more, really just supporting visibility of data across the organization, especially as artificial intelligence continues to skyrocket in interest and utilization, knowing the data, where it is, how it is, do you have the right ability to use it, etc. Huge architectural value. And then IT compliance, something we'll be talking about in a moment, and the story that I've chosen to illustrate some of the points today. So, huge one. Next, going through the slides is storytelling itself. As you're looking at these different services, as you're organizing the abilities of your EA practice, start to paint a picture using stories. Illustrate and explain to the stakeholders what your vision is, how you can help them, what the work product looks like. So you can give them some examples, some visuals, show them how you can add value, you can increase efficiency, you can streamline innovation. This is one of those keys back to the connotation at the very beginning of the presentation. While many have this notion that architects get in the way of innovation, if architectures perform properly, we can actually put guidelines and principles, templates, patterns, standards in place that accelerate the deployment of technologies and innovation. And so show that, tell the story. And there's a side positive effect to telling this story. As you tell the story, one, you're looking to get buy in, but you also have the ability for those stakeholders to give you feedback that maybe the story doesn't resonate, or maybe there's a gap or a concern. And you can address that concern early on before significant effort has been invested, before any cost has been invested. So use the notion of storytelling to grow that stakeholder audience, to expand it, and to highlight and find areas where you may run into a challenge from that stakeholder group. All right, so I do have a real world customer story. I change up the story. So if you've seen part of this presentation before, it is a different story than I may have given in the past. I do want to give credit to a friend of Mega's, Tara Castleberry. This story does come from her work. And so much of it I am quoting and borrowing from her, but it is highly relevant to speaking to the value of architecture and moving from noisy to influential. So, a little bit about the context, mid-sized insurance company, but it's born from a divestiture. What that means is that being spun off, it has sort of an interesting set of competing goals. On one hand, it's like a startup. It wants to move quickly, grow quickly, expand, and do all the things that a newly born company would do in startup mode. But at the same time, because it is a spin-off or divestiture, it comes with legacy architecture. So it's got some of the challenges of a larger historical organization, but it's got some of the ambitions of a new and smaller organization. And you can see in setting the context that there's different roles participating in this interaction with the enterprise architecture practice, and they have different views on how they're approaching the vision for their organization, forward thinking, practical thinking, traditional thinking. And highlighted point at the bottom is as you're interacting with these stakeholders, remember to look at it from their view. Put their shoes on, understand their pains and motivations. That will help you articulate a better service and better value. So, one of the common, I'll even describe it a little bit as a lower maturity entrance point to enterprise architecture, is application portfolio management. Now, I mentioned earlier, I don't love the name application portfolio management as the EA service itself. And here's part of why because APM can mean different things to different people, just as enterprise architecture can. So, speaking more to what will be done with portfolio management, the ambitions, the value, the direction, this is key. So, it's not bad to start with application portfolio management, but rather it's important that you clarify what about application portfolio management are you looking to do? How will you apply it? And what is the value to the organization? So, for example, I may have a notion of application portfolio management where I focus on trimming the tail. This is the large number of applications that may have no or low cost and very little, if any, impact to the organization. So, is there really any movement of aligning operations to strategy? Remember my YEA test from the beginning of the presentation. If the offering isn't moving operations into alignment with the strategy, am I really delivering the value? Probably not, especially in some cases, it may be either the reality or the perception that it's costing more for the EA practice to identify these inexpensive applications and slate them for removal than the actual value of their removal. Well, what else could we do? We could focus on the area here, and there is significant value if we focus on those few applications that do have a high cost. But there's also a challenge. These few applications with high costs tend to be instrumental to the business operations. And in many cases, when there are redundancies, it's through acquisition, and you've got business lines and business leaders who are quite fond of their specific application or technology. So identifying the redundancy is key strategically, but also we have to remember that's just step one. Being able to work with those business lines, architect a vision where we can remove and reduce those redundant, expensive technologies or find alternatives that are equally supportive of the business needs with the minimum level of negative impact. This is really a challenge. So it's not always quite straightforward. But last, we may focus on the notion of changing that dimension. Not only is cost an aspect that the business cares about, but business value itself. So, is there the right business value in the applications? And this goes back to that rationalization notion. If I have a business lens against which I can compare the technologies to validate does the business have the right technology in order to execute on the strategy? And if they don't, can we as architects propose, maybe look to new or emerging technologies to fulfill a gap that would allow the business to succeed in that strategic vision? Okay, so back to the story. We've got this company, it's trying to grow like a startup and move quickly, but at the same time, it's trying to handle legacy debt. We're trying to do two things at once. We've got to transform rapidly, but we've also got to be aware of compliance, regulatory, and security aspects. How do we do this? And again, for those who have seen some of my presentations, you may have seen this analogy before, but it appears at odds. Speed and technology in one direction, compliance and security putting on the brakes. But the truth is that they're really working together to the same target. We just need to change our perspective. And in some cases, it's that both sides have valid points. This is where enterprise architects can have immense value because enterprise architects give the visibility to see, as this picture illustrates, that each individual is correct from their perspective. And the architects can work to reconcile those perspectives so that we can come up with a common perspective and a common vision. In the case of the storyline, we've got a group that wants to promote the application rationalization to make sure that we find the technologies to move rapidly in order to transform the business. However, there's another group that's not convinced this won't become a chase the tail minimum value exercise. So, how can we appease both sides and achieve the outcome that they're looking for? And in this case, they had the ability to converge the EA and the risk perspectives. What if we do propose and establish a portfolio perspective that we can use for app rationalization. But in addition, in a lightweight, high speed manner, we look to that portfolio and determine whether or not we have the right security and compliance elements in place. This is really part of the key in terms of value and delivery, is getting something that works for both sides and showing how it can be done jointly. So there's collaboration, there's coordination, there's communication that really emphasizes the value for both audiences, in this case two sets of stakeholders, that the work that we intend to do will help them in each of their ambitions and needs. So just to recredit Tara Castleberry, friend of Mega's, and she came up with these tips, and I echo them because I run into these a lot. They are very key. The first one, meddle and meddle some more. As architects, if you're not meddling, if you're not talking to different people, if you're not asking questions, if you're not proposing the benefits and value of the EA services, you've got to do that. People don't know what modern EA is, what it looks like. They may have negative connotations. You've got to get out there and start talking to people, building bridges, and interject the value that you can offer. Sprinkle in magic with innovation. This has to do with showing the potential possible. If I've got architectures and I can show that there's maybe a way we can inject new technologies, we can increase visibilities for greater decision making, or in the case of the storyline, accelerate compliance because we've automated the update of the regulatory details and we've mapped through common sets of controls over to the tech stack, that we can make that a lightweight, high value exercise. People get excited by the potential. As a matter of fact, one of the new elements that people are getting quite excited by is business continuity management built upon architectural existing data. Become a trusted advisor. That's that noisy to influential progression. Go from noisy, get to useful, target trusted as a minimal, and then in some cases, we look to become influential. You've got to show that you can provide actionable, accurate intelligence and insight that these organizations and stakeholders can really work on. And the last, celebrate wins together. I will even say celebrate wins, period. One of the key notions of why EA practices struggle is that oftentimes the value oriented work is hidden in the background and you need to bring it forward. I do have a true story of a very successful architecture practice. They drove and scoped much of a large organization's transformation. But once their scope and their design, their blueprints were finished, they handed them off to a project team for execution. So at the end of the day, the PMO got all the credit for the value of the transformation. New leadership came on board and disbanded the EA practice. In this case, it was somewhat lucky that a number of issues arose very quickly, that in only a few weeks, leadership restored the EA practice, now understanding the role that they played. But it is absolutely imperative that you get credit for the work that you do, celebrate the victories and the wins, celebrate it with those stakeholders so that you can get more credibility and more information. All right. I gave a risk oriented story here. I'm going to jump in a very short version of the previous stories just to illustrate that if you're looking at this today saying, well, I don't know if a risk perspective is right for my organization today. I've given this presentation previously talking about modern software development. And in the case of modern software development, we're going to balance the context and the concept, sorry, of agility necessary for modern software and recognize that architects cannot get in the way of that agility. So, what role do architects play? They play in understanding the big picture, enabling adaptability. And what this means is that we're following all of the agile behaviors and patterns of the different software development activity and ensuring that they have the right foundational technologies in place, that they have the right visibility into the business guardrails as to what are the actionable business outcomes that they're looking to support and enable. That way, as they move quickly and as they pivot on their way to the goal, we're not getting in their way and they're not pivoting out of scope of the strategy. So there really is a monumental value that enterprise architecture can offer today in support of agile software development, starting with the recognition by the architects themselves, our group, to make sure that we're not getting in the way of the necessary speed and agility that these new software development teams possess and must continue to pursue. Additionally, another story that we have articulated recently is one that goes to operational excellence. And so this is an interesting one starting just last year, 2022. And I've attended operational excellence conventions, meetings, conversations for probably more than a decade. And if you raise the notion of big picture enterprise architecture, business architecture, there just really wasn't a comprehension. It wasn't a core element that there was focus on. But starting last year, operational excellence individuals started to ask about value streams, business capabilities, bigger picture, strategic alignment. And I think what's happening here is that the operational excellence initiatives, they've gotten very good at focusing on singular process or narrow scoped efficiency and enhancing it. And so now they're looking at ways to expand upon it. So ways in which that I could put in place efficiencies that have a greater applicability. Maybe one efficiency evolution can apply to several different processes or technologies. Similarly, in the same way I mentioned earlier, speed versus security or regulatory, operational excellence runs into that same contradiction. They're trying to increase efficiencies that may run counter to regulatory or security elements. So the bigger picture that architects can offer helps negotiate and reconcile that. So really it is one where OpEx and EA working together has a bi-directional benefit. The OpEx teams are already creating typically some level of visibility and models into organizational behavior. Could be process models, for example, could be their value streams, could be a number of things. But we can consume that to help fill in some gaps within the visibility the enterprise architects have. And then similarly, our big picture scope can help them reconcile to some of the potential interactions they might have, again, with security, regulatory, or other, recognizing that if they propose a certain change, now it's going to run counter to a regulation, so we've got to find a different way around. We can spot that early and save money and contradiction. All right, so in conclusion, and then we'll see if there's any questions, just reiterating what I mentioned earlier. Why enterprise architecture? What is the purpose? This notion here, align enterprise execution, the operating model, by design to the company strategy. This is an umbrella statement. It doesn't need to be the purpose statement for your EA practice, but you can use this to test these services that your EA practice offers to validate if they do, in fact, have recognizable value. Are they making change to the company? I use the illustration in application portfolio management of trimming the tail, the no cost, low cost applications that perhaps have no impact to the business. Am I really moving operations into alignment with the strategy by turning off an application that has no cost and no impact? Not really. But if I am ensuring that the business has the right technology at the right cost with the right level of risk, yes, absolutely. In that case, I would be supporting moving operations into alignment with the strategy. So it is a great test to validate the value. And then last, the mission for enterprise architecture, ensure that all EA practices, ensure that your EA practice delivers undeniable value as recognized by stakeholders outside of EA. If you are not testing whether or not the stakeholders outside of your EA practice view your EA practice as valuable, you need to start doing that. And a true story here as well. We have run a one question survey at enterprise architecture events over the years. And we would ask, is your EA practice noisy, useful, trusted, or influential? And as the architect goes to answer the question, they almost always are moving their finger towards trusted or influential. We add the caveat as answered by the stakeholders outside of EA, and immediately they change direction and tap on noisy or useful. So it's really imperative that you get that visibility and you understand their needs so you can demonstrate concrete value. With that, I will thank you for your attendance today. I have put my LinkedIn information, that's the QR code. So feel free to scan that, send out a connection request. I'd be happy to connect with everybody. Additionally, my team will be reaching out to everyone after the presentation to see if you do have any questions or if you'd like to meet to discuss further. I'm happy to have a no pressure conversation about value within your EA practice. It's something near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking to continue to expand that capability across all EA practices. With that, I will check to see if there are any questions in the live storm. And again, just thank you everyone for your participation today. So let's see. I don't see that there are any questions. I will check quickly if there's any in the chat, and I don't see any there either. I'll just wait one more moment. If you do have any question, you could either put it under the questions section or the chat. And otherwise, again, I will thank you very much. I look forward to connecting on LinkedIn, and hopefully we can meet as our team follows up. What is the level in which and I assume that's chief enterprise architect, should be reporting to? So, great question. I think it goes back to my why versus what of EA itself. It depends on EA in that organization and what you're achieving. On one hand, the ideal would be to an operational aspect like COO, for example. In most cases, we do see it more in the tech stack. I would like it to be up as high as possible, but it really does depend on the level of EA services that the practice is offering. If they're lower maturity entrance point services, it's probably going to be a little bit lower in the stack. As you mature in the EA practice, I think you can make the case to grow that reporting. And eventually, if you get to that influential level, get a seat at that strategic table, having advanced conversations of where the business can go. And then there's a question about getting access to the presentation materials. We'll facilitate that to the registrants. In addition, the recording will be shared. So we'll send that out. Let's see, when we think about EA, it's typically a technology led role. Do you envision that it is a joint business and technology role? Yes, I envision that minimally there's a greater business involvement in enterprise architects. And I do see that as more and more of, let's say, general individuals become more technology aware, then both business and tech individuals can have technology aspects in their conversation. I would like to see architects more aware of the details of their business so that they can keep up with the business side of the conversation. So, absolutely, I would love to see more and more business involvement in the enterprise architecture conversation. And yes, would love to see more business participation. Should the business architect or solution architects report to the enterprise architecture department of the business? Again, this really does all come back to the services that your EA practice offers. I would like to see a more aligned BAEA solution architect set so that the work is brought together, aggregated, because you do have greater visibility. And that could be done by having a reporting structure. Even if there's not a reporting structure, if the enterprise architects aren't using, for example, the capability models of the business architects, that would be a shame. So for sure, there should be a shared alignment there. And then if the enterprise architects are one, ensuring that the architectural runways in place, foundational technologies, then I would want solution architects to be able to leverage that. And similarly, if I'm identifying business needs at the enterprise architecture level, I'd love to be able to align the solutions that solution architects propose under that as well. This gives us greater understanding of the technological utilization so that if there is, for example, a risk or a problem, we can understand the impact that has on the architecture. Additionally, as mentioned earlier with artificial intelligence, as solution architects are looking to incorporate different data sets, really aligning to the enterprise architecture to see how it all comes together is massively beneficial. So keeping the BA, the solution architects, the enterprise architects aligned from the work product and data perspective is key. From a reporting perspective, probably it'll be easier if they're reporting together to keep the data aligned, but really that data alignment is more critical for me. Let's see. An end-to-end architecture method would be beneficial as the glue needed to bridge EA, SA, BA visit. Exactly. And when you talk about the end-to-end architecture method, it goes back to the EA services. The methods are what's going to implement those services. So how do we approach them? You have the different methods, we clarify it, and in clarifying the EA services and the methods to make them work, we clarify the data sharing between EA, SA, BA, etc. Do you think the EA org should report to the CIO or the chief business officer? Again, depends on the services they offer. If they're hyper EA IT focused, sorry, then probably the CIO, if they've really gotten to a maturity where it's business outcome oriented and is really addressing business challenge and proposing business solutions. I'd love to see the EAs reporting to some level of business officer, like an operating officer, et cetera. It is still today predominantly under the IT stack, of course, and that's often because the EA services are still heavily IT focused. What would you recommend in cases that the enterprise uses one tool in global and another tool in local? All right, so I'm a vendor. I have to say that whichever tool is mine should be adopted more broadly. But in another case, we have a method that we work on called federated architecture. And so typically it's that you should have a clear representation at that enterprise wide enterprise architect level. And although I would prefer, of course, that all the different architects use my platform, in many cases, they're going to have their favorite tool. As long as we can aggregate the result into the enterprise vision, then we'd be in good shape. If you have a global, and I'm not sure exactly if global, that's kind of corporate versus a regional office, and they're both enterprise architecture targeting, I'd probably try and coordinate and move to the better tool called HopeX. But it really can be federated when you cut across the different architectural dimensions. What have you seen to be the biggest impairment to successful integration? And that's going back to the integration of BA, solution architects, enterprise architects. A lot of it is conversation, believe it or not, goes to that knocking on doors. And so we'll go to places and say, okay, you're an EA group, you're, let's say, lower maturity, getting started, you're looking to focus on app rationalization, and they say, yeah, we're struggling with this business capability model, and they don't even know that there's an existing business architecture team who has one, who's successful, who's manicuring. So I'd say first thing is awareness to the different groups that exist, what their work product is. I would knock on doors not only with the business but the different architectural domains. Who are the business leaders of those different domains, and set up a meeting and conversation and talk about shared benefit and shared value. The other thing, and this is often the fault of enterprise architects. I hate to admit that because I consider myself as one, but the historical connotation is enterprise architects tried to impose constraints on not only software development or business transformation, but also other architectural practices. So it's got to be clear that the enterprise architects come with an open mind of collaboration, and not that, hey, we're the EAs, we're here, and we're going to tell you, the solution architects, what you can do, and we're going to tell you, the business architects, what you can do. That's another impairment, is this perspective that the EAs are really going to try and constrain and dictate. We don't have the authority. Don't pretend we have the authority. Articulate EA services, and then pitch to the leadership of the different architectural groups how we can collaborate to strengthen the value of those services. Should EA report to its own domain or practicing a center of excellence architect team? So again, it really comes down to that notion where you've got what are the services you're offering, and that's going to speak to who reports to who and how it's organized. Let me see. So I've got just a comment, no questions, but happy to see your perspective aligns with how we're implementing EI at our organization. We realized early on that focusing on what the stakeholders find value is key to build trust in our team. They're now coming back to us asking for assistance and guidance. Thank you for that comment, because it affirms this does work. I have seen this. For those who don't know, I've been at Mega since early 2001. I've gone through a lot of projects, and I've seen a number of them do very well. I've seen a number of them do less than ideal. And the ones that do very well look to the value that the stakeholders are aspiring to achieve. And that's how you build trust. And then the challenge when trying to distribute resources while still trying to build the practice stuff. Yes, absolutely. When you start to articulate those services, and that goes to what I mentioned earlier, what are the capabilities of that EA team, and how can we build on it? Let's see, next question. Have you seen successful deployments of decentralized EA and models that work better than others? Um, Not really. So there's a pendulum swing that had occurred, and it's probably in still in swing. So it was kind of hyper centralized, which was the ivory tower model, and that didn't work. That was that dictator model of EA coming in, telling everybody what they're going to do, and it swung too far to the decentralization, where there really wasn't an enterprise architecture. There was sort of a siloed, scoped architecture, and so we're seeing some swing back to the middle now, which is sort of a balance between the two. It's establishing an enterprise wide visibility so that you can see the implications, the impacts, the benefits between the different segments of the organization, and allowing decentralized activity. So, for example, if I have a centralized EA team, I may loan architects to project teams that have skin in the game. And as a matter of fact, in the example of this presentation I give related to the software development, I specifically have a slide on this. that it's important that the enterprise architects have skin in the game for the transformational work that they support. And so that's typically the catalyst for decentralized EAs. There was no accountability, no skin in the game. We swing too far. Now they're decentralized too granularly. And now you got to get a bounce back where that decentralization feeds into a centralized view and is maintained. So you've got that traceability to look for these big picture strategic alignment business outcomes. I appreciate the positive note. So there's a thank you from an audience member. I appreciate that. And I just see there's still some typing. So I'll give it another couple of minutes if there's a couple more questions or conversation. Again, otherwise, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And again, my team will be reaching out to you, proposing meetup. We can meet and discuss further. It does not need to be some high pressure sales conversation. Are there tool implications to support a hybrid EA model? Yes. I don't know all the specifics of the competitive tools. I know that the tool that I work for and promote has the ability to do broad scoped enterprise architecture where you can kind of plug in project level accountability. Others may also have it. And then there are ways even around it. So I could use an enterprise architecture tool for the sort of central EA vision, and I could use solution architecture level tools broadly. Do I recommend any specific tool? I do. Mega is a tool vendor, and the product and platform is called Hopex. It is what we call connected EA. That means that it offers at a platform level a broad scope of enterprise architecture coverage. And then you can pick each piece that you're interested in. You can grow your practice over time, and our platform will grow with you. I am representative of that vendor. So just want that to be clear to everyone, but absolutely do recommend our platform, Hopex. Any other questions? I think they're coming in a little slower now. I really do appreciate the questions. This was a great interactive dialogue, and I look forward to further conversation. Again, LinkedIn, the QR code right there, connect up. Otherwise, my team will reach out and we'd love to set up a meeting to discuss further. And it can be method level, can be tool level, can be any aspect of EA value that you'd like. So some more thank yous. I do appreciate that. It's always good to get positive feedback. And I hope we can connect and discuss further in the future. Again, thank you also for the individual who put in their own success story that echoes what I'm pitching. It is where I see the high success. So if you can follow that approach and model, please do. All right, with that, again, I'll do a final thank you to everyone. I love the dialogue, love the questions, very interactive audience. Appreciate it very much. Everybody, please have a wonderful day, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you very much. Bye.